Kyle Whittingham's future with Utah football is still up in the air. Should Kyle Whittingham want to come back for another year? Should Utah want him to return as their head football coach? We're talking all the angles as well as what Utah needs to do to reemerge as a college football powerhouse. Hint, they're not actually super far off. We're talking about it on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media. We can follow our show on X at Locked On Utes. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our fantastic friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on today's show by Moose Bingham, Utah kicker, recruiting extraordinaire. Moose, always great having you on. We're going to talk about a little kicking at the very end of the show as Utah got a big special teams commit earlier in the week. Also talk about, I don't think Utah's that far off from regaining their form as a conference contender, as many people probably think they're really far off. I actually don't think it's the case. But I do want to open with this, just Kyle Whittingham, his future with this team. When the question is, should Kyle Whittingham retire? I want to first talk about it from Kyle's perspective. I do not think Kyle should retire yet if he doesn't want to. I think he should run it back for one more year. This year did not go Utah's way, but I will remind people, it's not like Utah was a disaster. They were in every game that they lost. Only two games that they lost were not one-score games, the Arizona game and the Colorado. And in both of those games, they had chances in the fourth quarter to make it a one-score game. So this Utah team is still right there to me. A couple bounces, and they obviously beat Houston. They beat BYU. Like, when you're this close, I don't think, especially when you're coming off of an 8-4 season, coming off a quarterback injury, and then before that, back-to-back conference championships, I don't think Utah should want to move on from Kyle Whittingham, and I don't think that Kyle Whittingham should hang it up right just yet if his heart is still in it, which based on his emotions, I still think he is.
I think so too. Whittingham, here's the deal. He's given more to football in the state of Utah than almost anyone ever. He can retire on his own accord. If he loses the next 3 seasons in a row, he should get a 4th and a contract extension. That's how much I respect Kyle and what he's been able to do. But we look at this, and Kyle is the biggest competitor I've ever met in my life. He works out every day. He does all the little things right, and he's adjusting. He's trying to figure out this era of college football, and it takes everyone a little bit of time. Kyle, he's been sitting there. He's been like, okay, what if I try this? What if I try that? But the injuries have decimated him. You're telling me if we had Cam Rising that we're going 4 or 5 wins or 4 wins or whatever it was? No. We're going and we're going to have a great, great situation. When you're down your 5th string quarterback, I've been there when I was coaching. I was coaching at BYU and we were down to our 5th string quarterback. We're like, I don't know if we can beat SUU right now, because that is the signal calling. And Utah's biggest glaring weakness, honestly, was the offense. We needed a spark plug. I think Andy Ludwig has done some amazing things. I think Utah was lucky to keep him and not let him go to Notre Dame this last year. And at this point, sometimes it's like, hey, are you going to just...
So that's where it's nice, right? Left middle of the season, and now you get Mike Pacheco, and now you can make whatever coordinator hire you want, right?
Yeah, and we can go in, and you can bring a coordinator in, and he can bring his own guys in. But the thing is, will Kyle allow this coordinator to be a coordinator? Will he allow this coordinator to do what he needs to go in and maybe run a high, fast-paced offense and not rely on the running game and the tight ends? Maybe allow some of these receivers to step up and do what they were meant to do, and that's catch the gosh dang ball in the end zone. And if Kyle is willing to adjust his thought process, get the receivers the ball, keep running it, do what he needs to, I think Kyle has an extraordinary season. The Big 12 is a winnable conference. We've seen that all year. And what's nice for Kyle is the teams that were at the bottom this last year will be at the top next year. I see it as the AFC South of college football. If you're losing one year, get ready to win the next year, and nice things are going to happen for you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think especially in the Big 12, it's so wide open. Utah is still right there. And I jumped the gun a little bit earlier, but Moose, I think we both agree too. Like, not just Kyle should want to come back if the fire and passion is still there and earn the right to. Utah should still want him back. Yes, this year was a bit of a struggle, but he's had success in the NIL era. And Kyle is a competitor. So even competitors who are a little stubborn, which every head coach is obviously, are going to be willing to give a little bit in order to win and make those adjustments. I believe that he is going to be willing to make those adjustments and changes to the offense that need to be made, getting the quarterback room right. I think that's going to be a big priority for Utah. How can it not be when your games consistently come down to quarterback play? And I don't think that Utah, look, there's still a chance that they could bring Cam Rising back potentially, but I do believe that even if they did that, right, like they would still be like, okay, we need better backup options moving forward because we saw how hard it was to win with the current backups that we have. So I do think this is a situation where that Kyle should still want to come back. He can learn from his changes, and Utah Moose should obviously want Kyle Whittingham back for all that he's done for them. We think Morgan Scalley is going to be a good head coach. We do not know that. We know Kyle Whittingham is still a good coach. He still gets his team ready to play each week out, and this culture is still phenomenal. That's why if Kyle still wants to be the guy, I think Utah should still welcome him back.
Absolutely. And you're right about that. I think Morgan's going to be a phenomenal head coach for years. But if he can get another year under his belt, go through the hiring process with Kyle. What are you looking for in an OC? What are you going to give him? What are you going to take away from him? All those things are huge lessons that Scalley's going to be in every single second of those situations and be like, okay, we can do this, we can do that. More than signing day that's coming up, the portal's opening up. You have to have an offensive coordinator in ready to go because he can bring in all of his own guys. If you hire someone from a big-time school, because this roster situation, Robert Blecken has a lot on his hands to look at the roster and what's going on, and it's going to be a huge situation for Whitt, Blecken, and Scalley. I'm excited to see how they form this roster, and honestly, if it were me, I'd have 50 quarterbacks on the roster at this point. Because I just can't, I can't see another season where we're down to their fifth string quarterback and sitting there thinking, hey, why don't we just go Wildcat this whole time and still win the freaking game?
Yep, you are absolutely right. Utah has to have more than enough quarterbacks ready to go. And I love that you brought up Robert Blecken because what is he? Utah's GM. What does he do? Put together and assemble Utah's roster. Me and Moose are going to play Utah GM here in a moment and talk about what Utah needs to do to return to being a conference contender. And I really don't think this team is that far off, as we mentioned with all those one-score games and how close Utah was to ending up on the other side. Usually those games flip one year to the next. There's a lot of reason for optimism. We're going to talk about what changes Utah needs to make to get on the right track in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Speaking of the NFL, so much great action coming up in the National Football League and even college football, right? Yes, Utah's not in it, but we get Texas versus Georgia in the SEC championship game. How about even in the Mountain West, we get Boise State versus UNLV. I'm fired up for that one too. And even in our beloved Big 12 now, Iowa State versus Arizona State. A lot of great college football games, NHL, NBA, college basketball, whatever you are looking for. FanDuel is the place to go. And don't forget, FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. You can get started today with $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. You can visit FanDuel.com today. All right, Moose, coming back into this one, talking about this Utah football roster. Look, if we are playing Utah GM and I am evaluating Utah's roster, if I'm Robert Blecken and I'm sitting, I'm going, okay, what do I need to do to get my team back to being a Big 12 contender and thus a college football playoff contender? I think it's really simple. With 20 of the 22 starting positions on a football field, I think Utah can currently win the Big 12 next year. But there are two major ones that they need to upgrade at. There are other minor ones that they need to fix, but there's two major ones. Just let me explain. I see your eyes, my friend. Quarterback and wide receiver one. That is what you need to upgrade at. Everywhere else, I think there are pieces in place to win the Big 12 next season. But quarterback is that important of a position where if you get the right guy there, things can flip. Also, obviously, a big part of this is hiring the right offensive coordinator too. But from a roster building perspective, quarterback, and you have to replace Dorian Singer and get a better wide receiver one. Everywhere else, I think Utah has options that I believe they can win the Big 12 next year with, except for got to get another QB and got to get a wide receiver one.
Yeah, we need a wide receiver 1, 2, and 3. We've got a trio of sophomores coming in, and I really like Cameron Calhoun. I really like Dadrian Zipper, and I really like Tishawn Lyons. They're all great receivers.
He's a great corner. I get what you're saying there, but I mean, we also got to look, Munir McLean has done some nice things there, and you're right. They need to get a better wide receiver one, but look, those guys, those sophomores flashed a lot of potential, especially late towards the season. That's why I'm just saying, hey, if you get one more veteran, that'd be nice, but I don't know if it's a need. I like the flashes I've seen. Well, I'm an optimist. You can't fault me for that.
So you're not worried about the interior of the O-line at all?
I am absolutely slightly worried about the interior of the offensive line, but I look at the interior offensive line like this. I think Utah can win the Big 12 next year with improved play from the interior offensive line that they will be bringing back. I look at the offensive line like this. You're set at both tackle spots. I do believe you will get Mokafisi back as your right guard. That leaves two spots on the interior. I believe Utah can win the Big 12 with Tanoa Tongai as your left guard as well. So I'll say this then too. He had nice moments along the season. He was up and down, but another year starting, I believe in growth and improvement. And then at the center spot, that's the one. Jaron Kump's going to be moving on. Look, Keith Olson had a lot of great flashes late, and I'm going to bring someone else up who could also start at left guard. Garcia, the 4-star offensive lineman out of Corner Canyon. That's a guy who's just sitting on the back burner. He can kick inside and potentially play guard. And before you push back on that, wait, Jaron Kump did it. Jaron Kump was a tackle. Why can't Garcia?
Garcia's taller. Like the leverage is where you win on the interior of the line. Garcia is a tackle. You're not going to kick him inside. You can't do that. Like it doesn't work, unfortunately. You're going to have to bring in some kids and you're going to have to figure out what to do. But right now, the center position is terrifying for me, to be honest with you, because you're losing not one, but two seniors at the center position, where you're losing Jaron Kump and Johnny Maea. Go ahead.
Jaron Kump is taller than Isaiah Garcia. Kump is 6'5". Garcia is 6'4".
Is he really?
I swear, I just looked it up while we were talking about this.
Man, I thought Isaiah was 6'6". Hard thing for me, ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking up to everyone anyways. But I don't love it. I like Isaiah on the outside, but we do have two phenomenal outside players. And moving Isaiah from tackle to center is a big ask. Kump, there was a lot of growing pains with that. It's easier to move tackle to guard, but center, you have to know how to snap the ball. You have to have perfect technique, and you're the leader of the offensive line. If Isaiah can do it, that's amazing. But I feel like you have to hit the portal and you have to bring in a kid or two for that. And on top of that, I still think you need a running back as well. One or two from the transfer portal as well, because Utah goes through running backs and they find a lot of good running backs. I would love to get a JUCO kid in there at both of those positions. Someone that's experienced, that's been playing, not someone that's been sitting on the bench that's a 5-star from high school.
Yeah, I think you make great points on those other positions because, as I said, for me, it's 20 of the 22 positions. I think you can win with what you currently have in the room. But if we're doing where could Utah benefit from an upgrade or at least bringing in competition, I did have running back. I had center. I have left guard. I have defensive end, getting another pass rusher. Logan Fano feel good about, right? But John Henry Daly and as well as Paul Fitzgerald, in games, but they didn't really flash much. So that's where, can those guys improve in that? Sure, we'll see. Linebacker, right? You're still losing Corene Reed. You're going to get Lander Barton back more than likely. Be at Leavani Damuni, another one that you should likely get back to. You have Jonathan Hall who will hopefully come back. So there's other good options there. And then I did have wide receiver 2 there as well. But for all those positions, let's start with running back. Anthony Woods. Yes, he's coming off an injury, but 1,000-yard rushing when he was back at Idaho. That's a big boost to get in there. Mike Mitchell continuing to grow and develop. I like the flashes that he had. And DeJon Stanley, that speed. You can't keep him off the field. Another year to grow and get stronger. You get him there. We already mentioned Keith Olsen and Garcia, as well as, look, this Utah team, you make a really good argument that they need to bring in a transfer offensive lineman. The reason I'm going to say I think they can win with the guys in the room is I think those guys showed enough, but also part of it is we just haven't seen Utah bring in transfer offensive linemen. So maybe that'll change this year, but they haven't done it so far. I already mentioned DN, linebacker, and then wide receiver 2, Zacharias Williams, Darren Zipper, Tayshawn Lyons. They showed enough to me. They really did, to be like, okay, could Utah add another wide receiver? Like, can they add another wide receiver too? Yes, absolutely they can, and they probably should. But I do not think if they do not add a wide receiver, I don't think that means they don't add another wide receiver, because they have to add the wide receiver 1. I'm in there. But if they don't add another wide receiver, I think they're okay. Also, Utah's history of wide receiver 2 in the transfer portal is abysmal. I mean, Damian Alford is a massive bust. Emery Simmons is another massive bust for what he was asked to do for this team. So, as I mentioned, I would have QB and wide receiver as my biggest needs. And so what would be your biggest needs in that same realm? Would it be larger than just those two?
Well, for me, it depends on who the offensive coordinator is. What are we doing offensively? And once we have that question answered, I can give you a lot of stuff. Like, if we're going pro style, I'm saying number 1 is a center. I mean, we can't have this pressure in the A gap. We had 4 quarterbacks go down. That tells me our offensive interior line play was not good. Just that's kind of how it is. You can't have this many quarterbacks go down from fluke injuries. Something's happened. They're getting pressure up the middle for them to either start running, not go through their progressions, and do all of these things. If we get a 10 personnel type offensive coordinator, we have to go 4 receivers deep. And that's the harsh reality. I'm not comfortable with just having 3 receivers that you stated when we probably need 12. Like, who are we going to bring in? And that's what is going to say it. I mean, if we do go an 11 base personnel package, we may lose a bunch of tight ends to the transfer portal. Like, if we are a 10, we may lose some running backs. You have to balance that out and understand who's coming in, what's our identity, because I think Utah's offensive identity is up in the air at this point. Like, who are we going to be is a big question mark for me, at least. And who they bring in is going to change a lot, because if you become a high, fast-paced offense, that's going to change some things. That's going to be a different ball game, and you're going to ask the defensive players to be on the field more, to do a lot of different things. And it may not be these low-scoring games anymore. It may be a higher scoring game when everything's said and done, because there's so many offensive possessions at the end of the day.
You're absolutely right. The offensive coordinator hire is pivotal. And Moose, you study this game so much. You work with so many different levels of football too. What offensive identity and what style do you think is best for Utah moving forward, and that they should prioritize in their next offensive coordinator hire?
So for me, I'd kind of go outside of the box a little bit. I would look at the offensive coordinator for New Mexico. As funny as that is, a Jason Beck, someone who won't demand that much money, that you can put the right people around him, and you can put a lot more money into the transfer portal, getting a lot of different guys. His offense this year is top 8 in the country in yards per game. Utah has to identify and do what they need to do, and they need to change things up. It's not working anymore. The good defense, great running game, it just isn't. Nick Saban is a prime example of someone that believed in that philosophy until he finally said, you know what? We got to go get a Tua Tagovailoa. We got to go get a Mac Jones and a Jalen Hurts. And we've got to change our identity, because I won't win games anymore 9-6. And I think Whittingham has gotten pretty comfortable with that. But I think at this point, he's got to be like, hey, we're in a different conference. It's going to take some shaking up. And I think he can shake it up right now and make a massive change. But with that, it may cause some changes in the staff. It may do a couple different things. But I think you have to shake it up and just see what happens. It's one of your last go-arounds, good year or bad year. Go have fun with it. Let's have an offensive explosion.
I do agree that this is a year for Utah where, look, if Kyle does come back, it's one of the last opportunities. So you got to change up everything offensively. And I do believe Utah is going to have a massive overall on offense, but we'll see how this offensive coordinator hire ends up progressing. Moose, one thing we are excited about that seems to be progressing is Utah special teams, particularly the kicking game. Cole Becker did some good things, but I feel like even though he was a senior, it was also okay for Utah to move on because he did have a couple misses too. So that's where, hey, if you lose Cole Becker, you need another kicker. Well, Utah just got a kicker, and dang, did they get a good one locally. What can you tell us about Dylan Curtis?
So Dylan Curtis, super interesting kid. He's only been kicking for about 2 years now. He's really determined. So he's got that Andy Phillips type situation where he's just like figuring it out as he goes. But he's got a bigger leg than Andy. We've seen him. He set the state record in Utah for longest field goal. I think it was a 65 at Tooele, which is on natural grass, super horrible field, but he did it. And he did it with room to spare. His kick would have been good from about 75. So he's a kid that has one of the biggest legs in the country. He's rated by Chris Saylor as the #1 kicker in the country. He's invited to All-American Bowl. He is doing a lot of good things, and he's a smart kid on top of everything else. The fact he's getting a scholarship from Utah is huge, especially in the transfer portal era. A lot of teams, they're like, hey, we want a proven kid. Maybe go get the kid from Washington that had a little bit of a down year and should have a better year this next year. But he's a kid that I think can come in, start right away, and be a 4-year starter and go right into the NFL. That's the type of talent he has. Comes from a great family. He just wanted to be close to home, and he had better opportunities around the country, to be honest with you. Opportunities that I'm like, what are you doing? You probably should have taken that one. But with him, I think he's going to come in, be a day one starter, and he's going to make Utah look really good once again because Utah is special teams U after having so many Ray Guy award winners and Lou Grozo runner-ups. There's been some great special teams in the state of Utah, and Dylan Curtis is just the next man up. I'm excited to see what he can do, but it's hard. That's the one position, if you're not perfect, almost everyone hates you. You're like, even with our kicker this last year, you're like, yeah, Cole Becker was fine. He was really good. I mean, gosh, if I was doing as good as him in life, I'd be like really excited. But here's the deal. The expectation for Utah is perfection. That's what Dylan Curtis is signing up for. He's going to be kicking on thinner posts. He's never done that before. It's going to be a learning experience. So the first year, he may miss 5 or 6. You're going to have to grow with him and be patient. And with that, if you throw him away, it's not going to be good for you. So if this Utah fan base is patient, his sophomore, junior, and senior year, he will be phenomenal. If you're not patient, he's going to hit the portal after 1 year.
Yeah, and that's where it's tough. That is the nature of the game, right? If guys get frustrated and things happen there too, right? So this is when I say Becker, he was 18 for 24. He was 7 of 8 from 30 to 39, 7 for 10 from 40 to 49, 0 for 2 from 50 plus, 75% accuracy. When you hear 18 for 24, I will say, I'll let you turn it back over to you. Is that a good mark for a kicker?
It's average. I like Cole. I mean, he's a good kid.
And he did really good things. There were just moments where he missed some kicks that were unfortunate.
Yeah, and a lot of those were pretty early in the season, and he was having a tough time. To where they even brought in the backup kicker, Trey Coleman. And it's going to be interesting. I think Trey Coleman, he's a good kicker too. The lefty, he does a lot of good things. He's from San Diego. He is an LDS kid, so I believe he's going on a mission. Okay. So you may have to bring in another kicker to compete because competition, that's one of the best things. That's where I would bring in the kicker from Washington or someone else that's a senior and be like, hey, you have one chance. If you get beat out by a freshman, that's on you. Sucks to suck. But if you make him get a red shirt, that's a win for us. So that's where I'm looking at it, where Utah's going to have to bring in a transfer specialist as well. And I hope it's a fifth-year senior that's been through the ropes that can teach and go through and be like, hey, this is where I messed up. This is where I was good. That was really great for me, my second season with Justin Sorensen, where he's like, hey, this is what I wish I would have done. And when you have a fifth-year player, they're not looking over their shoulder. They're like, either I'm going to do it or I'm not, but it's all on me.
Yeah, I think a veteran is the best way to go for Utah, but Curtis is incredibly exciting. 6 for 6 versus Payson, which is most in a single game on field goals. 21 field goals made on the season, which is the most ever. Also made a 63-yarder, which is the longest ever, and that's just insane to be doing at the high school level already. So really excited for Curtis's future. Last thing I want to ask you, Moose, you mentioned it. Number 1 in the kicker rankings, according to Chris Salyer's kicking thing. He was the 8th punter. Is it possible at the Division I level to do both? Okay, why not? Why not?
You can do 2 of 3. So Louis Sakota was a great kicker and a great punter, and he didn't do kickoffs. You can do 2 of 3 because it's like going golfing all day, then going to batting practice and hitting a tennis racket. Can you do it? Yeah, you can do 2 of 3 of those things very successfully. But I never have any specialists do all 3. Dylan Curtis, the way he does his rugby punts is good for high school. It's not effective enough in the college level at this point. I think he's a phenomenal kickoff specialist. I think he's a great field goal kicker. Those are his 2 out of 3. And you bring someone else in, you don't put that much pressure on a specialist ever.
Yep. I think that's where you don't see anyone else do it. So even though he's a really good punter, has been, that's where it is just hard to do both, as you mentioned. So he'll just probably be a kicker for Utah, but be interesting to see how Utah's special team evolves over the transfer portal, as everything is going to evolve for this Utah team over the transfer portal. And Moose, we may be in the football offseason, but it's still a busy time, especially with everything going on recruiting. Please tell everyone what you got going on.
So if your child is in the recruiting process, get them recruiting for parents. Go through it with your family, understand the recruiting process to the next level, and you guys will be set. So understand, if you want your kid to get to Utah, there's a process, there's a procedure to do that, and you can learn it all on recruitingforparents.com. That's recruiting the number 4 parents.com.
Moose, you're the man. Thanks again for coming on.
Anytime, always a pleasure.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you tomorrow talking more things Utah football related. Offensive coordinator hire, I sure hope so. We'll see what all it all plays out. We'll see you then.